a moment here, we're going to be in Revelation 14 and 15. Before we jump into that, a couple of housekeeping notes, really, is where we're going to start with. If we stay on schedule, we should be done with Revelation by the end of this month, by the last Wednesday night in March. But to do that, we have been keeping a pretty good speed. We've been going at a regular clip to make sure that we can finish this class in a timely manner, which unfortunately means sometimes I don't allow much time for comments or questions. So I'm throwing this out here. And remember, if we do this, that means you have to be really nice because I'm throwing this out here. I'm wondering if once we get done with going through the chapters like we've been doing, if you would like to have a couple of weeks, or at least a week, to have some discussion, questions, comments, that we could kind of go over for a week or two as needed. If that's something that would be interesting to you, let me know. And that would also mean you might have to do some homework. You might have to go back and say, now, what did I have a question on? And write it down and bring it. Wow, if you turn it in ahead of time, that'd be really great. Just to have something available. Make sure you know what your thoughts are that you want to share with us. That would be the homework I would ask you to do if we do that. So I already see one comment on that. Revelation. Yeah, on Revelation. So if that's something interesting, let me know. If not, we might do it anyways. I can ask the ladies class teacher what she thinks of that idea. So but let me know if you have any input on that. But Revelation 14 and 15. Honestly, we can't do Revelation 14 and 15 without making sure we review in our minds, at least briefly, about Revelation chapters 12 and 13, because really, throughout this section from now until at least chapter 20, but even the end of the book, we have so much movement, and it's continuous. If we get to where I want to get to tonight, we're actually going to break right in the middle of the action that's about to happen. We're going to have a lot of big build-up, and it's going to be like, modern TV shows that there's going to be this big, huge build-up. We're going to get to something really big, and then it's going to fade to black, and you're going to go, I have to wait a week? Because that's how the action in Revelation's moving right now. And so to remember chapters 12 and 13 really leave us with a pretty bleak picture, because the beast, the multiple beast and the dragon, they're doing all these horrible things to try to stop the gospel. Now, we know they will fail, and even in those two chapters, there's some hope given about how they will fail, but still, we don't know exactly how that's going to happen in any account, symbolic or not yet. And so Revelation chapters 12 and 13 leave us with a pretty bleak picture of what's going on. Revelation 14 and 15, it's still going to leave us with a bleak picture, but it's a bleak picture with hope. Because the theme for these two chapters are, we won because we are not condemned. Quite frankly, chapters 14, 15, and 16 paint a picture of what's going to happen to those who are condemned at some point in time when they face their judgment. More on that momentarily. But we need to remember that our victory in Christ means we are not condemned. Means we don't have to face this type of judgment. And so no matter what this judgment is, it stands as a reminder of the hope we have to avoid the condemnation involved in the judgment that is to come. With that being said, just look at the first 5 verses of chapter 14. It says, Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like a voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. And then they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the 4 living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being firstfruits to God and to the Lamb, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne. Now, honestly, these first 5 verses are a lot of review. We have the Lamb appearing again, and there's no reason not to say that this isn't the same Lamb from chapters 4 and 5. The Lamb that is Christ. Now, remember at the end of chapter 12, 13, we're introduced to a different lamb, almost a fake lamb. All right? But this is a real, the real authentic lamb with his 144,000, which, without getting bogged down again into that number, it's the complete number of followers of Christ of some degree, whether it be the Old Testament followers, the New Testament followers, the combination of such, or some other group that we don't understand because we don't have all the definitions. These are the followers of Christ. And notice, the elders are there from chapter 4. There's this whole entourage that appears on Mount Zion, which is the name for Jerusalem. They appear there, and they're essentially going to be marching into the city, praising God, announcing things that are about to happen. It says these are the ones that are not defiled in verse 4. And then goes on to say they are virgins. Now, this is one reason why we would want to reject the literal interpretation of Revelation, because I've never seen anybody argue that the 144,000 have to be male virgins. Nobody who says they take the literal interpretation tries to argue that, interestingly enough. That's the problem with literal interpretations, is they're literal until they find something they don't like, and then they reject it and say, oh, that's symbolic. Well, it's kind of hand in hand. It's either all symbolic or it's all literal. So what we're really discussing here is a symbol of purity. We're discussing a symbol of those who have remained pure and undefiled from the world, from the beast that has just appeared in chapters 13, from the dragon that appears in chapter 12. They're not defiled by that in the ways of the world they represent. They're pure, and that's why they march with Christ, and that's why they know the song of Christ, and that's why they're praising God. And notice in verse 5, and in their mouth was found no deceit. Did that ring a bell with anybody? Who else is described that way? Jesus in 1 Peter chapter 2. See, these are the ones that are cleansed by Christ, who in his mouth was found no deceit. They become like Christ because they are following Christ, and so they are without fault before the throne of God at the end of verse 5. So, honestly, this section coming right after chapters 12 and 13 helps me realize God knows exactly what's going on. I think there needs to just be that reminder through all of this, and that we need to even still hold on today. No matter what maybe event in history or in the future that Revelation may be talking about, one thing we can hold on to is God does know what's going on. And God does see what's going on. And so this dragon appears, and this a land beast appears, and this sea beast appears, and God sees all of it, and now he's marching into the scene saying, I've been paying attention the whole time. I know exactly what's going on, and here's what's really going on. And that's when angels start appearing. And what's interesting is throughout chapters 14, 15, and 16, you have all these angels start appearing with specific jobs, with specific things to do. For instance, look at verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who has made heaven and earth and sea and springs of water. So, as this parade of Christ and his followers are coming through, you have an angel appearing before them, announcing what I can only come to as the gospel to everybody. And that's what the angels in chapter 14 seem to all be doing. They're announcing something. They're giving some type of vital information. Now, if you read through all the various commentaries out there, a lot of people will discuss, well, who exactly are these angels? And there'll be all these discussions about that. I think we miss the point. I don't think we need to be so concerned with identifying the angels. We need to be more concerned with identifying their message. And the first message is the message of the good news, the gospel that is to everybody. All right? And if we want to get bogged down in the angel is the one here, doing this, don't think that leaves, modern day Christians with an excuse to not spread the gospel. It doesn't. Because we're given a commission to spread the gospel also. So whether this angel is doing it along with Christians, whether this angel is some representation of Christians, or whatever it is, we got to get the message out. That's really the key. Yes?
In that sense,
exactly. And that's the thing. Angels means messengers. We don't want to lose the meaning of what angels are, is whether they're a heavenly created being that was a messenger, or us that is a messenger. We're messengers. That being said, go on to verse 8. And another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. So a second angel appears in verse 8 to warn. And the warning is, Babylon is fallen. Oh, Babylon. Honestly, if you will allow me, thanks, we're going to table the Babylon discussion. Because Babylon's going to keep coming up in the next 5 chapters over and over again. So we're going to table the discussion until we have more of a description of Babylon. Here it's just kind of brought up in passing. So let's wait till we get a little more information, and then we'll talk about what Babylon may or may not be. But the angel has a message, and it's a message of warning. Babylon is fallen. And all those who have been corrupted by what Babylon represents are fallen too. Verse 9. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, who worships the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. So this third angel appears to announce. So first to preach the gospel, second to warn of the fall, third to announce the judgment. Now, can I skip to the end? Thanks. At the end of this lesson, my question to leave you with is, which judgment is this speaking of? Don't answer. But when you read this specific section, it seems this angel might be announcing the final judgment, because you got everlasting torment. You got images that are later used to describe what we call hell. Used here. And so for that reason, some people just jump ahead and say this is the final judgment. All I'm going to say for now is, well, A, I'm not sold on that. I'm not sold on that either. But B, we need to always remember that there is more than one judgment day in the Bible. There have been several. And whenever Revelation was written, whether you take the early date or the late date, whenever it was written, there were still multiple days of judgment to come. Whether it be on Jerusalem if you take the early date, or on Rome if you take the late date, or on Jerusalem and Rome if you take, some weird third date. And then there is the final judgment. And then if we really talk about the geopolitical message of everything with God and the Bible and His Word, while it may not be miraculous and with signs and the ways we think of certain things, God's pronounced judgment on things before, since the Bible has come to a close. So just all I'm asking you to do is keep in mind that there are multiple judgment days spoken of throughout the Bible, and go back to some of those very first things we talked about. If we get so locked into this having to be one judgment day, we may get so locked into that we miss the message. Because ultimately, really, all three of these angels are warning. We preach the good news to save people from the judgment. We talk about the judgment to warn them of what can happen, and we announce what the final judgment is so that they can avoid it and be warned of how to avoid that. Now here's what's also interesting in verse 13. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on, yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them." At the end of each of these sections, again, going back to chapter 12, there's always that message of hope of what's happening to those who are following Christ. We've had him all through chapters 12 and 13, and we have it again here, that God, who has now, entered the scene a lot more directly than he was before, has shown himself. People are praising him, announcing things in his name, and then we have that, here's this horrible judgment coming. Oh, but John, make sure you write down that those who are serving God are going to be saved, are going to be resting, are going to receive their reward for their works. Ironically, because of how we've termed judgment in such a negative connotation today, we forget that sometimes you can be judged righteous. Sometimes you can be judged in a positive way. And the Bible makes it clear we are all going to face a judgment. It's not only the condemned that face judgment, the condemned and the righteous face judgment. It's just you're going to be judged one or the other. And that's what's really being presented here at the end of this section, starting in verse 9 through 13, is here's this negative judgment that's going to happen. Here's a positive judgment for those who are following God. Yes, Henry?
Jeff, as we read through these chapters, you can almost imagine someone in the first century taking this letter and saying, "What?
Yeah.
What in the world is John talking about?" And you do it some symbolic language, and then it seems so out of place for him to put in verse 12. He says,
Yeah.
very clearly, he's talking about the commandments of God and faith in Jesus. He identifies that. He sort of defines, the solution to it.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And that's exactly one of the, again, rules of Revelation is when we are told something directly, that stands. The symbols we may not understand, but these direct things are like, oh, okay, well, so we definitely know that.
And the symbol of this was symbolic because he was trying to protect the first century Christian
Definitely.
from the persecution.
Definitely.
Then he slips in.
Right.
Uncoded.
Positive, uncoded language that they would need. Because when you read this, you go, wait, is that us?
Well, another thing too, like Henry says, there's a key thing here where he says, from now on, talking to first century Christians.
Yeah.
We've known this ever since we've been born and heard the gospel. We're living in the gospel age.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in the now on age.
Right.
Look what Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. Almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those who die in Christ.
Yes.
Will not prevent those who allow their name.
And I thought of the same thing. There's definitely a connection of language to Thessalonians here. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's talking really to the way he says it from now on. So, that means all these things that he's illustrating, it's all the turmoil Christians are going to be going through.
Mm-hmm.
The world is going to be going through. And the world is going to be
Right.
wrapped up in all kinds of things.
And
That are against God.
to tie into that and dovetail to the next section, in Acts 17:30-31, we're told, these times of ignorance God winked at, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. And then verse 31 says, because there's going to be a judgment. So we need to repent. We need to think of God. And interestingly enough, John, that's what he kind of presents next, is the judgment through Christ. Verse 14, then I looked and behold a white cloud, And on the white cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who sat on the cloud thrust his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. All right, verses 14 through 16, quite simply, is talking about a judgment that's going to happen. Now, if you think that this Son of Man who is sitting on the white cloud wearing a crown with a reaping device is Christ, then again, we might be kind of pointing to the final judgment, or a judgment that Christ has done in the meantime since Revelation was written and between now and then. Either way, I do think this is Christ. The term Son of Man is a term brought over from prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel that Jesus uses in Luke 1, 31 through 33, and John 3, 35 through 36, to describe himself. All right, now the one in Luke is actually Luke using it, but the one in John is Jesus' own words to describe himself as the Son of Man. All right, it was a term that was thought to be messianic from the prophetic age of Daniel and Ezekiel, and maybe Jeremiah used it also, but I'm not sure about that. So it's a term brought over that Christ uses to apply to himself that is messianic in nature. It refers to the Messiah, all right? So it's used here after Christ has come, died, was buried, and resurrected, used here for this one on a white cloud with a crown of authority who's going to judge. I lean towards that's Christ. I'm not saying you couldn't say it's somebody else. It is something with divine permission to perform judgment. So that's why I lean towards Christ. Here's the thing. It's announced, judge now. And what's interesting, if you go back to Christ in one of his parables, that's actually, he uses a parable to present this very image of the wheat and the tares growing up together, and then they're going to come and be cut down because they were so intertwined, we couldn't tell them apart, so then we'll cut them down after they've grown, and we'll separate the wheat from the tares. And just maybe, John is borrowing on that imagery from that parable, bringing it over here by inspiration to refer to possibly the same event or some other judgment that's going to be done. Either way, this is talking about a judgment. And by the way, Acts 17:31, there is going to be a judgment. Now notice what happens in verse 17, connected with this. Then another angel, if you're keeping count, that's 5. Then another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel, 6, came out from the altar who had power over fire. And he cried out with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, "Thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe." So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. Excuse my pronunciation. There's going to be judgment. And it's going to be bad for those who are not following God. I can't decipher every one of these symbols. I don't think anybody living today can. There's just too many symbols here to try to figure out. But that imagery of the winepress is what's supposed to kind of stick with you. That humanity, like grapes, are going the evil, the wicked humanity, like grapes, are going to be thrown into a winepress and stomped so that their blood runs, and that the blood is going to be deep. That's the picture here. That's what's trying to get across. So all I can say is we have an announcement of a judge by the 5th angel. A 6th angel comes to take part in the judgment, and it's a bloody judgment on those who are not following God. The specifics of this all, 2 things. A, I don't enjoy thinking about. B, even if I did, I don't know if we can decipher all of this. Again, what it needs to do for us today is serve as a reminder that there is the final judgment. Whether this is what it's talking about or not, there is the final judgment that we have to be concerned about and make sure we're prepared for. So, Todd, I saw your hand a while back.
Well, I can't read this without thinking of the lyrics to Glory, Glory.
Yes. Yeah.
That's where this imagery comes from.
Yes. Yeah. The author of the words for that, her name escapes me, but yes, was borrowing definitely on that kind of imagery and other images from the Bible.
I was just going to say, in this section, you see, I think it's very comparable, some imagery of reality in the Old Testament, with the angel coming out and killing the army in Syria. Constantly, God is using angels to punish the people of Israel in the wilderness.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of images like
Yeah.
this. And I think it is metaphorical, but it's not too far from the facts.
Mm-hmm.
In that, and two, this is, to me, this isn't necessarily a negative thing, because the way I take a lot of this book, and a big theme of this book, is this is comfort, right?
Right.
The clarity of verses 12 and 13 going directly into this, coming from the warnings of judgment, coming from the scenes of the beast coming, I think that's something that the first century audience is going to understand.
Right.
They're feeling the pressure from the outside world decay. They're feeling the tribulation. They're feeling the temptation to give up, to defile themselves with all the paganism that's around them. And if they stay pure, right, not
Right.
necessarily literal virgins, but metaphorical virgins, they don't have to go through this. So
Right.
it's a comfort that God is so harsh. God's cruelty is a blessing to those who don't have to face it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and that is true. I just it's the comfort of those who are saved, have their salvation, but also the discomfort of what's going to happen to those who don't. Going off the Old Testament thing that you brought up, even the thunderings, the voice of God being thunderings. Well, thunderings were used once just to chase off the Philistines. Just the thunder of God chased them away. So yeah, these images are not accidental, borrowed over from the Old Testament and other places, even in the New Testament, to give one thematic message of, Christ saving, judgment happening.
And just to your comment about feeling bad about the opposition, I think this is a different age too. Because for us, unbelievers aren't smashing our babies on the road or killing them. They're not
Yeah.
taking our daughters into the Coliseum to be gored by bulls in front of an assembly of crowds who want to watch it as entertainment.
Right.
I don't think as Christians we're called to have animosity towards our enemies. We're called to love them.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when people are so evil, it's kind of good to know that God's going to take care of them.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
nowadays it's so much more peaceful. It's so much better. But back then it wasn't.
Right. Right. Well, chapter 15 continues by starting with, "Then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete." So more angels, and there's more plagues, 7 plagues, the complete number of plagues, kind of even giving a clue of how 7 is used here, representing the wrath of God. By the way, they're going to be in bowls or vials, depending on your translation. The concept is the judgment that's going to be happening in chapter 16 is in bowls that are going to be poured out on the land. All right? So what we do want to stick with is verses 2 through 4, which basically before this judgment is going to happen that's being described in chapter 16, we're going to have another interlude of worship. Verse 2, "And I saw something like a sea of glass mingled with fire, and those who have the victory over the beast, over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name. Standing on the sea of glass, having harps of God, they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the saints. Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy, for all nations shall come up and worship before you." The victors, the followers of God who have won, are singing a victory song. They sing the song of Moses, and specifically the second half of verse 3 and verse 4 are quoting from Deuteronomy 32:3, which is the song of Moses, and Psalm 145:17. So they're busy worshiping God, but there's one little word here that actually, at least to my count so far, has appeared 3 times in Revelation that often becomes a distraction for many readers, especially from the Church of Christ. Harp. All right. I actually have written in my notes, do not get distracted by the harps, because it does not affect what we do in the New Testament worship of the church. I just read that. Yet, it still sticks out because people bring that up. Well, what about Revelation? You people who sing a cappella and think that's what you should be doing. What about Revelation? Well, we've been doing this now. Is this the first Wednesday in March or second? First? So 9 weeks. Maybe 10 weeks. I don't know. I was told there'd be no math. And one thing over and over we've emphasized is the symbolic nature of Revelation. And so the harps, along with so many other things throughout the book, are symbols symbolizing worship. They're representing the concept of worship being done. And then notice again what's done. They have the harps, but they sing. They have a harp, but they sing the Song of Moses that has words, and they sing those words, and they say those words, and those words mean something. And that's the thing, is I think we don't need to get so caught up in harping about harps and that we miss that they're singing this great message about God, that he's great and marvelous, that he's almighty, that he's just and true, that he's the King of the saints, of the sanctified, that demands fear and glory, and is alone holy, and that all nations need to bow down and worship him. See, instead of getting caught up by trying to use Revelation to have an argument over how we worship, we need to focus on what they're saying when they worship, because it's great. I mean, it's so great that we've already seen from chapter 4, if we just lift it directly and put in a song, holy, holy, holy. You know, we see these great things being sung. So you know, we can talk about harps and, you know, this mean now we can use mechanical instruments in our worship, but that's really missing the point, you know.
You're going to take it literal. It doesn't say pianos and guitars.
Right.
It says harps.
And I was going to say that. Also,
Then we don't need to be taking harp lessons.
if you're going to take it literal, you also have to bring in incense and other items of worship used from the Old Testament in the book of Revelation as symbols of worship and prayers. So you don't want to try to analyze taking things literally out of Revelation, because we've already shown that that's ultimately going to fail.
And we have to stand beside the sea of glass.
Yeah, it's very true. Sea of glass. In Mount Zion with 144,000 male virgins. Thank you for that bell. That being said, don't miss the message of the worship being done by getting caught up in how it was done in the book of Revelation. And then the end, again, borrowing straight from the Old Testament in verse 5, after these things I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened. So it says that it's the temple of the tabernacle. In other words, not what Solomon built, not what Herod was building or had built or had already fallen, not what Ezra had built. The tabernacle that Moses built is what we're talking about here. And the action starts happening out of the place where this tabernacle is in heaven, that it is opened, and out of the temple comes the 7 angels having the 7 plagues, clothed in pure bright linens and having their chests girded with golden bands. So these angels now come out of the Holy of Holies with their bowls, ready to distribute this judgment in chapter 16. They're coming from the presence of God. That's what the Holy of Holies represented. They're coming from the very presence of God to do this judgment, connecting them with God, and that God is essentially endorsing, in charge of this judgment. And notice verse 7. Then one of the four living creatures gave to the seven angels 7 golden bowls full of the wrath of God, who lives forever and ever. The temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power, and no one was able to enter the temple till the 7 plagues of the 7 angels were completed. Both the temple of Solomon and the tabernacle of Moses at times were filled with smoke, representing the presence of God being there, representing God's endorsement of what's going on. See, the reason why the tabernacle and temple stand together as being ordained by God is because God accepted them in the same way, with his presence. What the message in Revelation is God is accepting this judgment. He is controlling this judgment. He's in charge of this judgment. And really, this judgment in chapter 16 is about to begin. This is what I said. We're going to build up to this moment where a lot of more action is about to happen, and then it's going to fade to black and say, to be continued next week. And and even, the chapter break kind of does that for us. Of course, I mean, if you read ahead, I won't, it won't be for extra credit, but it won't fault you either. But, there is this kind of break of this, and then it's going to start happening. Seth?
And in the wilderness, when the smoke entered the tabernacle, it meant sit still.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the believers who are reading this, it's sit still.
Exactly.
Look what God's going to do.
Exactly. I mean, if you ever have seen one of those shows that leaves you with that to be continued on a cliffhanger, I don't know, I can't tell what you might do. I know what I do. I just sit there for a moment and go, but, and that's almost, even though, yes, we can keep reading and go right into it, at the same time, I think we are supposed to just take that break and go, wow, what is about to happen? All right? Because we're getting to the big, another big action sequence in the book of Revelation. Go ahead, Louis, real quick.
Also, there's a song that they sang, talking about there. See, if you look back, that very same thing said back in chapter 5
Mm-hmm.
in John's vision.
Right.
First saw. And verse 9 said that they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy art thou to take the book and to break the seals." And he's talking about the Lamb. Who's going to open the seals?
Right.
Of course, when that was opened is when all this begins.
All this action starts happening.
Those that were in heaven were the ones that were saying, they were singing a new song.
Right.
And here he talks about the song with Moses and the Lamb.
Right. Right.
All in the New Testament combined.
Yeah, exactly.
Two songs.
Exactly.
The song of Moses
Song of Christ.
and the song of Christ.
Yeah, and all that put together to just kind of say, this is a culmination of so many things going on, and like you said, whether it be the seals being opened, the trumpets being blown, the bowls being poured out, this is where we see the most action in the book of Revelation. All right, the 3 things to leave you with real quick. You want to bell me now, and I'll just go over? He said yes. The 3 things to leave you with real quick. God is aware of what his saints are suffering. God is not sitting idly by. And God will judge and condemn those who fight against him. We won because we are not condemned. So that's the 3 things to take with you. God is aware of what his saints are suffering. God is not sitting by idly. God will judge and condemn those who fight against him. Thank you very much for your attention. Next week we'll get to chapters 16 and 17.